Cole woke early the next morning, the kind of cold, crisp dawn where every exhale rose like smoke and the sky glowed pale gold before the sun even touched the horizon. He decided to bring Mara a few supplies, nothing fancy, just a crate with nails, an extra lantern, and some tools he figured might make the barn work easier. He wasn't trying to hover. He simply believed in giving workers what they needed to do a job right, a habit passed down from his father. As he walked the narrow dirt path toward the barn, his boots crunching over frost-stiffened grass, he noticed something that made him slow. The padlock on the barn door hung open slightly askew as though it had been unlatched in a hurry. Mara must have come earlier than he expected anyone to show up for hard labor. He felt an unexpected flicker of respect. Most hands slept past dawn, but she was clearly determined. He raised his hand and knocked lightly on the barn door. "Mara? Brought you some things you might need," he called, his voice echoing faintly inside the wooden structure. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Strange, heavy silence that didn't feel like someone simply working in the back. Then he heard it, a whisper, soft as a breath. He frowned, leaning in. Perhaps she was praying, talking to herself. But before he could knock again, a shuffle sounded from inside, quick, light footsteps that didn't match the weight of an adult woman. Another faint sound followed, one that made Cole's blood still, a small cough, quiet but unmistakably that of a child. He drew back slightly, confusion creasing his brow. Children? Out here? Mara hadn't mentioned any. She had looked worn, yes, but not in the way mothers usually did when traveling with little ones. He knocked again, more firmly this time. "Everything all right in there?" More movement followed this time, frantic, hurried, almost panicked. A thump, a gasp, the kind of scrambling that spoke not of one person but several, as if bodies were trying to hide themselves in the shadows. Cole didn't feel irritated. Instead, a knot of concern tightened in his chest. Something wasn't right. He reached for the door, intending to simply check on her, but before his hand touched the wood, the latch clicked, and the door cracked open just an inch or two. Mara's face appeared through the narrow gap, pale, tense, and lined with exhaustion deeper than the night before. "Mr. Thatcher," she breathed, voice trembling, I'm sorry. I wasn't expecting you yet." Her eyes kept darting behind her, not casually, but with a kind of protective desperation, as though she were guarding something fragile. Cole noticed the tremor in her hands, the way she clutched her shawl around her thin shoulders. He held up the crate slightly. "Didn't mean to bother you." "Just brought supplies," he said in a calm, even tone meant to soothe. Before she could reply, the cough came again, this time louder, small and unmistakably childlike. Mara flinched, her face tightening with fear. Cole saw it all in a heartbeat, the panic, the dread, the silent plea. She wasn't hiding tools or belongings, she was hiding people. "Mara," he said gently, lowering his voice so it wouldn't carry. "Is someone in there with you?" She tried to speak, but her throat worked silently, tears filling her eyes. For a long moment, she looked at him as though waiting for judgment, expecting anger or threats or the door being pulled open by force. Cole did none of those things. He simply stood steady, patient, a calm presence when everything in her world seemed to be collapsing. Finally, her shoulders sagged and she whispered in a voice cracked from fear, "Please, don't make us leave." In that single trembling sentence, the mystery inside the barn suddenly became painfully clear. Whatever Mara was hiding wasn't trouble. It was desperation, it was survival, and it was more than just her own life at stake. "You said." When Mara finally stepped aside and opened the barn door a little wider, Cole didn't rush in. He simply followed her with quiet, steady steps, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through the high windows. What he saw inside stole the breath from his lungs, not because the barn was in worse shape than he expected, but because tucked into the far corner, wrapped in blankets and huddled together like a cluster of frightened birds, were 4 small children. They looked up at him with wide, wary eyes, 3 boys and a little girl, all with faces smudged by dust, hair tangled from sleep, and clothes that had clearly been worn far too many days in a row. The oldest boy, maybe around 9, straightened instinctively as though trying to shield the younger ones, while the smallest clung to Mara's skirt with fingers white from fear. Cole stood still, his presence calm, his hands hanging loosely at his sides to show he meant no harm. Mara's voice trembled as she spoke, the words falling from her lips like a confession she had been dreading. These are my children," she whispered. "I didn't tell you yesterday because I thought you wouldn't hire me if I did." She swallowed hard, tears burning in her eyes but refusing to fall. "We've been traveling for weeks. I needed the work. They needed shelter. I thought if we were quiet we could rest here just long enough for me to earn enough money to move on." Her words were thick with shame, fear, and a desperate mother's hope, not for herself, but for the little ones whose eyes were fixed on Cole with anxious curiosity. Cole didn't respond right away. He felt something heavy settle in his chest, not anger, not annoyance, but a deep, aching sympathy. The children looked hungry, their cheeks hollow, their hands clutching blankets that barely kept the cold at bay. He noticed a small pile of belongings, a threadbare bag, a cracked tin cup, a few pieces of stale bread, and he realized with painful clarity that this barn had not just been a temporary hideout for the night. It had been their only refuge. Mara continued, her voice cracking. "We left home because it wasn't safe. I didn't know where else to go. I thought if I worked hard enough, maybe we could stay unseen just long enough to make a plan." Cole's eyes drifted to the youngest child, a little girl no older than 4, who was rubbing her eyes with tiny, cold fingers. She looked exhausted, fragile in a way that made something inside him twist. The oldest boy, thin but proud, stepped slightly in front of his siblings, trying to appear braver than he felt. "We ain't trouble, sir," he said softly, voice barely above a whisper. "Mama just wanted us warm." That simple sentence shattered any lingering uncertainty in Cole's mind. He knelt slowly, lowering himself to the children's eye level, making sure he didn't move too fast or tower over them. "I'm not here to turn anyone out," he said gently, his voice steady as a quiet promise. "You're safe." Mara's breath hitched at those words, her shoulders sagging with a relief so raw it nearly broke her. For the first time since he'd met her, the fear in her eyes flickered, not disappearing, but softening just enough to reveal how deeply she had been holding herself together. Cole took in the entire scene, the cold, the hunger, the exhaustion etched into every small face, and he understood full well that this wasn't Tia woman trying to cheat him out of work. This was a mother doing everything she could to keep her children alive. And whether or not he had expected to find a family inside his barn, one thing settled firmly in his heart. He wasn't going to let them suffer another night. Cole remained kneeling for a moment longer, letting the children see that he wasn't a threat, letting Mara breathe as though she hadn't taken a full breath in days. And then he slowly rose, wiping his palms on his jeans as he took in the full weight of the situation. The barn was too cold for children to be sleeping in, and the dust and hay scattered across the floor made it clear they'd been trying to make a home out of a place never meant for living. Mara stood with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, not from the chill alone, but from the raw vulnerability of being exposed, her secret pulled into the daylight where judgment usually followed. She braced herself, ready for anger, for commands to leave, for the familiar sting of rejection that had chased her from place to place. But Cole didn't raise his voice. He didn't scold. Instead, he took a quiet breath and spoke gently. "Mara, they can't stay out here. Not another night." His words made her flinch, her fingers twisting the edge of her shawl, because she heard only one meaning, that he wanted them gone. But Cole shook his head before she could speak. "No," he said softly. "I mean they need warmth, food, a real roof. My cabin has space. It's not much, but it's better than this." Mara's lips parted in shock. She stared at him, searching his face for the catch, the condition, the hidden price behind his kindness. She had met many men on the road, men who offered help only to demand something in return, men who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. She whispered, barely audible, "We can't stay in your home, Mr. Thatcher. We're strangers." "And I don't want to be a burden." Cole shook his head again, more firmly this time. "You're not a burden. You're human beings who need help." "That's enough." The simplicity of the statement nearly unraveled her. She covered her mouth with a trembling hand, blinking rapidly as though fighting against tears she promised herself she wouldn't to shed in front of her children. The oldest boy looked up at Cole with a mixture of hope and disbelief, while the littlest girl tugged at her mother's skirt, whispering, "Mama, warm!" Mara knelt quickly and pulled the little one into her arms, pressing her lips against the child's forehead to hide her shaking. Cole watched the scene unfold with a heavy heart, realizing that whatever hardships this family had faced, they had learned to expect very little from the world. He cleared his throat quietly, not wanting to rush them but unwilling to let them freeze another night. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "I'll make room. I'll set up the spare bed and make space near the fire. The storm season's coming. It's not safe for anyone to be out here." Mara stood slowly, still uncertain, still afraid to hope. "Why?" she asked in a fragile whisper. "Why would you do this for us?" It was an honest question, one rooted in years of being failed by others. Cole didn't answer right away. He looked at the children, at their thin frames and raw hands, at the bravery they tried so hard to muster. Then he met Mara's eyes and said simply, "Because you needed help. And because I'd want someone to do the same if I were in your place." There was no grand speech, no grand gesture, just sincerity, solid and unshakable. And in that moment, something shifted inside Mara. A tiny crack opened in the walls she'd built around herself, and through it slipped a single, fragile moment of trust. She nodded, not fully convinced but willing to try, and whispered, "Thank you." Cole stepped back to give her space, then gently said, "Gather what you need. I'll meet you at the house." As he walked toward the cabin, he knew with absolute certainty that nothing about this winter would be simple. But he also knew deep down that letting them stay was the right thing, the only thing his conscience would allow. And for the first time in a long while, the quiet ranch didn't feel quite so lonely. Settling into Cole's cabin was awkward at first, not because he made them uncomfortable, but because Mara and the children were simply unused to kindness that came without conditions, without suspicion, without the sting of strings attached. The first evening Cole stoked the fire hotter than usual, bringing the cabin to a warm glow that made the children blink in disbelief, as if warmth itself were a luxury they weren't sure they were allowed to enjoy. Mara prepared to stand the whole time, insisting she could eat later, but Cole simply motioned for her to sit at the table with a quiet firmness that brooked no argument. The children approached the food cautiously, at first bowls of stew, warm bread, even butter, but once they realized the meal was for them, their hunger took over, and they ate with the frantic gratitude of little ones who had gone without far too often. Cole didn't stare or pity them. He simply let them eat, only stepping in to refill bowls or offer an extra slice of bread. After the meal, as the fire crackled softly, the youngest girl toddled closer to him, wide-eyed, clutching the wooden spoon she had insisted on keeping from dinner. Cole crouched down to her height and smiled gently, and though the little one didn't say a word, she reached out and touched the sleeve of his shirt as if to confirm he was real. That small, innocent gesture warmed something inside Cole he hadn't felt in years, a familiar ache of wanting to protect, to nurture, to belong to something more than the quiet rhythms of his solitary ranch life. Over the next several days, the ranch began to feel different. Not chaotic, though. 4 children brought their fair share of noise and life, but fuller, richer, as though something long missing had been quietly set back in place. The children found their own ways to help around the ranch. The older boy eagerly followed Cole to the barn each morning, learning how to gather eggs, how to brush the horses, how to check the gates. He watched Cole with a seriousness that touched the rancher deeply. The boy was hungry, not just for food, but for guidance, for a steady presence he could trust. The middle children, 2 energetic boys, took to playing outside while Mara worked alongside. Cole in small ways, sweeping, helping with meals, mending torn clothes, and even patching up a ripped saddle strap using a needle and thread she carried from place to place like a talisman of survival. She never stopped trying to earn her keep, never asked for rest, though Cole often nudged her to take breaks, reminding her gently that helping someone didn't mean expecting repayment for every kindness. Slowly, something unspoken began to form between Cole and Mara, not romance. Not yet, but a quiet companionship built on mutual respect. He admired her strength, the fierce, protective love she held for her children, the way she worked even when exhaustion tugged at her shoulders. And Mara in turn began noticing the gentleness beneath his rugged exterior, the way he always made sure the children were warm, the careful patience he used when teaching them chores, the quiet smiles he offered when he caught them watching him with shy admiration. In the evenings, the cabin no longer echoed with silence. Instead, it brimmed with the soft hum of bedtime stories, the crackle of the fire, and the children's sleepy giggles. One night, as Mara tucked the smallest girl into the bed, Cole had arranged near the hearth. She looked around the room, the cozy glow, the children's full bellies, the peaceful quiet of safety, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself in a very long time: hope. And though neither she nor Cole spoke it aloud, they both sensed the truth settling quietly between them. This wasn't just temporary shelter. Something deeper was taking root, something that felt dangerously close to the beginnings of a home. By the time evening shadows stretched long across the ranch, Ethan had made a decision that surprised even himself. He invited Lily and her children to stay the night in the small guest cabin behind his house. He told himself it was temporary, just one night of shelter before he figured out something more permanent, but deep down he already sensed this wasn't. Tia one day promised he felt responsible for them now in a way he couldn't quite explain. Lily hesitated at first, her pride tugging hard against her fear of returning to the cold, mold-ridden cabin she'd been renting. But the moment her youngest child shivered in the breeze, she quietly nodded and accepted. Ethan spent the next hour gathering blankets, lighting the cabin's old stove, and making sure the place was warm enough, realizing more and more how long it had been since anyone else's comfort mattered to him. Watching the children explore the little space touching the quilts, giggling at the bunk beds, fascinated by the smell of fresh wood smoke, made something ease inside him, something that had been tight for years. Lily stood stiffly at first, apologizing for taking up space for her children's noise, for the trouble she was causing. But Ethan gently reminded her that they weren't trouble, that no mother raising 4 kids alone, doing everything in her power to keep them safe, could ever be called trouble. When he brought in a pot of stew he'd reheated, Lily's eyes shone with a mix of embarrassment and gratitude. He could tell she wasn't used to being helped. As they ate together in the warm glow of lamplight, Ethan learned a bit more about her, how she'd taken odd jobs after her husband abandoned them, how she worked until her hands ached, how she hid her struggles to keep her children from worrying. He noticed the way she watched her kids more than she watched her own bowl, making sure they had enough before taking a bite herself. The sight stirred something protective and aching in him, memories of his own lonely childhood, the years he'd spent believing that caring for someone would only lead to loss. But tonight felt different. This little cabin buzzing with children's laughter felt like a reminder of warmth he hadn't realized he missed. When the youngest fell asleep against her shoulder, Lily whispered that she didn't know how to thank him. Ethan only shook his head and told her she didn't have to. As he stepped outside afterward, closing the door softly behind him, the ranch felt quieter than usual, but not empty, more like it was holding its breath for something new. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a purpose beyond the ranch chores and the endless quiet days. The stars brightened above him as he walked back toward his house, and though he couldn't yet name the feeling building in his chest, he knew one thing clearly. Helping Lily and her children wasn't charity, it was the right thing to do. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something his life had been missing for far too long. As the days passed on the ranch, a gentle shift began to settle over the household, something quieter than celebration but warmer than mere survival. Mara, who had spent years flinching at sudden sounds and guarding her children like a cornered animal, slowly began to breathe easier. The ranch offered a rare kind of stillness, a place where no one shouted, no one threatened, and no one demanded more than she could give. Cole's patience became the foundation of that peace. He didn't press her to reveal more than she wished, didn't question her decisions, and didn't hover over her like someone expecting repayment. Instead, he showed her children how to brush down the horses, mend a loose latch, stack firewood carefully, and in return the children began to trust him in ways that surprised even them. Mara watched her eldest son stand a little taller each day, watched her middle children laugh without fear, and saw the youngest toddle toward Cole with open arms, something she'd never done with any man before. One evening, as the sky turned a deep purple, Mara finally spoke about her past. The years of running, the nights spent listening for danger, the worry that pressed down on her like a stone. Cole didn't interrupt or pity her. He simply listened, offering calm strength where words would have failed. In that moment, Mara felt her walls shift, not collapse, but carefully lower. She began to realize that this ranch wasn't just a temporary refuge. It was becoming a place where she could imagine healing. The quiet routines, the shared meals, the growing trust between Cole and the children all wove together into something she had never dared to hope for. The beginnings of a life not built on fear, but on safety, dignity, and the fragile promise of belonging. As winter softened and the ranch settled into a steady rhythm, Mara realized just how much her life had changed since the day she first stepped onto Cole's land. Trembling and exhausted, what began as temporary shelter had grown into something solid and deeply grounding. Cole's quiet reliability became the pillar she and her children leaned on, never demanding, never overstepping, simply offering safety and patience in ways she had never known. One morning, after a fresh snowfall lay shimmering across the fields, Cole gently told her he wanted them to stay, not for a season, not until she got back on her feet, but permanently as part of the ranch, part of his life. Mara stood speechless, overwhelmed by the weight and warmth of the offer. Her children didn't hesitate. They cheered, clung to Cole, and pleaded to stay exactly where they were. In their joy, she saw the truth they already felt at home. Over the next days, the ranch pulsed with a new sense of belonging. Mara cooked in the kitchen while Cole taught the children chores that made them beam with pride. Her eldest learned to ride confidently. The younger ones gathered eggs and fed the animals, and even the baby toddled after Cole with fearless affection. The nights by the hearth were filled with laughter, gentle conversation, and a peace Mara once believed she would never experience. Watching the sun dip behind the hills each evening, she understood what Cole had truly given her: not just a roof, not just protection, but a place where her children could thrive and where her heart could rest. And as she looked at Cole, steady and steadfast, she realized they weren't just surviving anymore, they were building something that felt unmistakably like a family. "You said